Before we get started, I want to remind you that next Tuesday is our annual auction, and we are raising funds to benefit Habitat for Humanity. And Dean Johnson and Cornerstone are amongst our sponsors, as well as Homebridge. And I think Rosemary is unable to join us today. So we are raising $75,000 is our goal for Habitat for Humanity, and we're pretty excited. It's all virtual. You can watch it from your desktop, from your home smart TV, and your mobile device, anything you want. It's really going to be fun and very easy. So please join us. You can register online at our website in our events section. So today we are proud and excited to bring you Dave Stevens for, is this the third time in a year, Dave, that you've joined us? Or
is it third or second?
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
And so this is our quarterly leadership roundtable, and you all are part of our leadership group, and we appreciate that you bring your wisdom and your ears to this conversation. And Dave is going to give us commentary on the market and the moving parts of policies and politics in DC. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A. So if you're willing to participate, ping me in the chat and we will set you up for the Q&A. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Lisa. Hey, everybody, good to be back with you. I wish I could be up in Washington State because there's so many beautiful areas. But I did make it post-COVID out to the West Coast last week to go wine tasting, my wife and I, with a guy who used to be at Wells Fargo, Brad Blackwell, and his wife. And so it was so surreal after vaccination to actually go on an airplane, something absolutely insane. Hey, so what I'm going to do, guys, is I am going to present a deck. I'm going to share it. I'm going to go through the slides very quickly because it's a lot of data. It's all brand new. I got my data from 3 different economists: Mark Zandi from Moody's Analytics, who is pretty much at least in DC, the most renowned economist that affects our policy that we care about. But he affects global policy as well, because Moody's, as you know, rates sovereign debt, global debt, munis, corporates, everything. And so Mark's view is obviously very important to markets. I had Mike Frattantoni. He sent me fresh data yesterday. So I'm going to reference some of his stuff, the chief economist at MBA, and frankly, one of the best economists in the nation, with an incredible background. I'm just amazed I was able to get him to be head chief economist at MBA when I was in my job. And then I have a little from Frank Notaf at CoreLogic. So all of this is going to paint a picture. Oh, and I also have a little bit from Rob Dietz from the Home Builders. So I'm going to do this because I think it's important to show consensus of perspective, so that it doesn't look like it's one-sided from one particular economist. So hopefully you're all seeing this. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, so let me start at the top. Just look where we are, right? The bottom left is, I didn't pull off today's numbers, but this from a couple days ago. Vaccinations since January. I mean, just what an incredible change in our nation since the vaccine started rolling out, and going to have a huge impact to what's going to be, and as you saw yesterday with the inflation data, it's going to be an overinflated, extremely hot economy, and that has a lot of implications for everything we do. That top right picture is the photo I took. I told you I went wine tasting in Northern California. That's me flying out of Dulles a week ago Sunday on a normal flight, not during rush hour. And that's the hallway in the terminal at Dulles Airport. I mean, who would have thought we'd be seeing that so quickly where we are? But this is from Zandi, from Moody's Analytics. And, look at their forecast on achieving herd immunity for the United States. It's the blue line, reaching herd immunity somewhere in Q3 in the country, far better than the world forecast. And keep in mind, this data is not, it's Moody's, it has their view, but it also has World Bank data and also our world data, which is a great research think tank. And so, this all is part of the story of how America and this economy is going to be in one of the hottest zones that I think probably any of us have seen, except for rare instances in our careers. And so it's going to have a lot of ramifications. If you think about non-farm employment and look at what's going to happen, we see the spike down in 2020. Now look at the recovery. This is in the gray zone from 21 moving forward. You see the American Rescue Plan. That was the COVID relief plan that was already passed, the $1,400 checks and more PPP, et cetera. Hugely stimulative, by the way, at a scale that we've yet to see. You see we reach herd immunity later in the year. Then we have Build Back Better, which is the infrastructure plan. As you know, the president had both the leadership from the majority and the minority at the White House yesterday in separate meetings. They're going to have a deal. Probably not 1.9 trillion, but it's still going to be probably a pretty big package. And then I want you to look at the next slide, the next spot. Fed tapers quantitative easing. So, there's an infamous meeting that happens every year in Jackson Hole, where the Fed attends. Every economist that I have spoken to, even beyond this list in recent days, believes that we are going to see some leaning towards tapering of QE. That's important because the Fed is the biggest buyer of mortgage-backed securities. You take out the biggest buyer. That's a supply-demand challenge, as you all know. The supply remains, the demand shrinks, and in order to get those bonds sold, you're going to have to drop the price on them or offer, as it were, higher yields. So you're seeing some of that already. You're going to see a little more of that later in the year. People ask what's driving growth. It's a variety of areas, but you can see the big zone is the blue section here, at least for right now in 2021. It's fiscal support. But you see, as we move into 2022, I want you to notice the purple pent-up savings. I'll show you that in just a moment. And reopening. Look at the impact reopening's having. We're already seeing a shortage of ready, willing, and able employees to fill mostly service level jobs at this point. But this is really just the beginning. Hotels are going to have to rehire. Airlines are going to have to rehire. There's going to be more flights, on and on and on. Retail is growing, et cetera. In fact, if you think about retailing, look at this slide. This just shows you the pace of retail openings based on business to business sales. It's percent change over a year ago. So I want you to look back to April, May. We saw retail sales year over year drop about 40%. Now we see reopening retailers are now up about 20% from baseline of 0. It's a net change of 60, but still short of, just shy of where normalization will be. But it's just amazing what's going on. Obviously, I'm a New York City kid where I was born. But if you live or work in Manhattan or DC, Denver, Chicago, San Francisco, LA, there's still going to be a lot of retailers that there's going to be a change of hands as those urban markets move over, Seattle, et cetera. But it's amazing the growth. I discussed pent-up savings. This is a big issue. You guys probably aren't aware, but the $700 refund checks that came in November of last year, as we all know, they were sent to everybody. It wasn't based on need necessarily. The vast majority of those monies were just spent in the economy. It's really what's caused a GDP spike in January. In the January numbers, this is huge. I mean, the pent-up savings that we see now across the country, this is in billions, is just an indicator of what money is going to come back into the market. These are people who have their jobs, but they've been staying at home and they're going to go out and travel now. We're all seeing these issues with obviously the fuel supplies on the East Coast because of the pipeline issue. But there's a general warning just about fuel supplies across the country as America goes out. And I know all of you are thinking of travel, and you're along with everybody else. And so that's kind of where we face. But your market is kicking it, right? It's just been unbelievable. This is mortgage applications from the MBA going back. It shows this year is the black line up to week 17. So, 4 weeks and a month in, but then you have 4 months and a week in, excuse me. But then you see the previous 5 years we're having the biggest purchase application cycle that we've had, really going back. I could throw 2015 on there, it wouldn't matter. You'd have to go back to 2005 to see anything even nearly close to these kinds of numbers. Even last year, if you look at the green line after the dip in March, that's when the Fed kicked in, as we all know. It not only improved refis, which obviously was a big, massive refi year. Look at purchases for last year, it was just huge. And so, yeah, we have constraints on this because you're all worried about inventory, as we all should be, but just a booming market. And I think it's important to recognize markets do change. This is Mark Zandi's view of what's going to happen with the 10-year. I'm going to show you a few views of the 10-year. You're seeing it at, like yesterday, the spike, obviously it's bumping around because of what's happening in market conditions generally. But, the 10-year is forecasted to move up according to Mark. Those are years, so taking you out, but expecting this to see a steady increase in the 10-year. And I'll give you another perspective on that that's a little more refined. This is from Mike Fratantoni from the Mortgage Bankers Association's view. And keep in mind, any chance you get a chance to see Mike, recognize he's a PhD economist from one of the best universities in America, and he was a professor of economics. Again, he happens to be our industry economist, but don't underestimate his exceptionalism. So his view of the 10-year Treasury, as you see here, going from right now to 2023, steady increases heading up to the 3s, and mortgages, steady increases heading into the 3s and up to the 4s and probably 5 as we look in the out year, all based on a combination of 3 things: the ending of or reducing of quantitative easing of QE engagement. That's what we call tapering. So that's a supply demand issue. G fees rising because of the capital rule that the FHFA has yet to implement too, and then just general inflation. So all 3 of these things are going to be issues. For you guys, you're sitting at the incredible center of the cone of business performance. Existing home sales, new home sales inventory, left and right. The shaded in bars are sales. The red line and blue line is inventory in months available, and that tells your story, right? That's why now we're at a point where everybody's putting in all cash offers at full price or above, non-contingent. If you have a story to tell and you need to buy a home, it's going to be a much more difficult process, right? Especially in key markets, not all markets, but key markets that are hot where we work. Here's just another way of looking at inventory. I pulled this off of the Federal Reserve's website, the St. Louis Fed, which holds all the data. They call it FRED. It's a great research tool. But just look where we are in terms of inventory. We're at historic lows going back to the 1960s. This is their historical context in terms of months supply of housing in the United States. And the only time we got closer to it was in the pre-years running up to the Great Recession. Now, many of our industry, even some of you may have joined the business after 2005, but for those of us who are in it, that shortage of inventory was frankly built on unsustainable credit. NODOC, Nina, CISA, NEGAM at 100 LTVs, all of that was going on in the market that created the spike that you see here in the gray zone of 2008 that caused the Great Recession. And then obviously inventory shifted because of the foreclosure crisis. So this is a very different event, very strong credit, a QM world, no unsustainable programs. This is just truly based on demographics. That's what's driving all of this demand. And as CoreLogic shows, they just published this day before yesterday. This is the year over year, March to March of previous year. Look at home price appreciation. You see big spikes in certain markets, like 18% in Phoenix, but national home price appreciation year over year was 11.3. And I talked to 2 economists that contributed to this deck. both believe we're going to have at least 10% this year. So, just big year for home price appreciation, and frankly, maybe high single digits in 2022, 2023, 2022, and maybe 2023. But we are going to have extraordinary demand going forward. It's a great story, not only just to sell your home into this market, but if you can buy a home, you have nothing but a positive story in terms of home price appreciation going forward over the long haul. And there's a reason for that, which I'll share with you in a moment. But this heated story is crazy, right? So this is from Redfin, but it shows the percent of home buyers that made offers sight unseen in December, 63%. Why sight unseen? Mostly COVID, right? I mean, it was, you couldn't leave your home. You had to do it virtually. Many states still didn't consider real estate an essential business. And so you weren't even allowed to, go into homes or do showings other than virtually. And so people, 63% bought homes sight unseen. Who would have ever thought that would have happened, except in hindsight, looking at a pandemic impact. Good news is we have home building coming back. So this is home starts, new home sales and single family home starts. Forget the new home sales data. Those are in the bars. But just look at the line, which is single family starts. So that's new construction starts at 1238. It's actually, the builders have it at a slightly higher number, but we're seeing, growth in new home building, a very positive thing. Don't pay attention to the dip in February because there's noise in the number, and we also had a short month. But the other way to look at it, this is from Rob Dietz. He's the chief economist of the National Association of Home Builders. This is on their website. You look at March at the very bottom there, where I put a red line, 1739 of total housing starts in this nation. But I want to have you reflect back to 2016. It's higher than anything we've seen in years. And frankly, you won't see this high a home start number till 2003. So, the good news is, despite all the inventory issues, the cost of goods, the lumber prices, the zoning issues that are affecting home building, at least we're seeing a positive trend line that I expect to continue as we move forward here, which will at least help marginally the supply challenges. But what you have to realize is long-term rates are on the rise. And I'm only gonna focus on one of these charts here to the right that I'm focusing in on. I just wanna highlight the point that Moody's is trying to make, that if you look at treasury yields and you looked at 1970 to 2019, they've averaged 6.3%. Now we're sitting with treasury yields today at, I haven't looked in the last few hours, but 160, let's say. They're ridiculously low. It's all due to quantitative easing. I mean, that sub 100 basis point treasury yield that we saw at its low point is all due to Jerome Powell. He is solely the driver of these rates, as you all know. And the only reason rates were driven that low by the Fed chair is because the economy was so weak. A healthy economy is going to produce higher interest rates and less intervention from the Fed. It's just a matter of when. And again, we expect the Jackson Hole August meeting to be that time they announce it. By the way, you may remember Ben Bernanke in the Obama years did a similar announcement when they started tapering, which they did taper afterwards. His words were a little too aggressive. That's why they call it a taper tantrum. But nevertheless, we expect this to be the meeting where all that happens. So what's going to happen next? So for all of you guys, this is a slide I'd show my realtor partners. So this is all of America by age using the 2020 census. Okay, so from brand new babies up to age 80 and above, this is each cohort. Now, the peak buying year in America for first-time home buyers is age 34 or 35. The MBA and NAR, the realtors, disagree by 1 year, but so what? So that's where I have my line. If you look at the cohorts that are coming our way to buy homes, it's huge. I also want you to look to the right of age 34, 35, going down into that slope. That's Gen X, by the way. That was with us during the Great Recession of 2008. We just didn't have the demand. We didn't have enough millennials in their 30s ready and willing to buy a home. The millennials were in their 20s. That's why the rental growth was so strong. But you guys have, looking forward, if you just take the age 34 line there, or 35, and just go back down to age 24, 25, you've got a decade of demand literally built in, at least at the pace you're at right now, only to increase for the next 6 years or 7 years or so for demand. So if you're a purchase mortgage originator and not dependent on refis, you're going to have a great time. This is going to be just an amazing decade ahead that everybody has forecasted. In my last presentation to you, I showed a different slide from the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies, which says the exact same thing. But if I'm a realtor, man, you're in a good business at a great time. And the only challenge you're going to have is getting listings. Because once you have the listing, your sale is going to happen overnight. And it's not just a now thing. It's regardless of what happens to rates, because rate forecasts are built in to those numbers. So what's going to happen going forward? Let me show you a couple views. This is from the National Association of Home Builders. This is their forecast on home sales, but I want you to look down below. Look at their forecast for fixed rate mortgages. So for 2021, an average of 341. Now we've been in the twos through so far this year. So that tells you to get an average of 340, you're going to have to be above 340 for a good chunk of the latter part of the year. Are they going to be right? Are they going to be wrong? You can debate that, but this is one view heading into 390, then 417 going out 2023. But this is not just one person's view. Here's the MBA's view. MBA views, and I want you to look at the 30-year mortgage line. It's in the top section, but it's the last line of the top section. 370, going to 4.4 next year, a little more bearish with the 10-year rising, but still both, when you look at new home sales, existing home sales, and purchase originations, doing nothing but increasing. I can't find an economist who doesn't believe that both these things are going to happen. I could have shown you a Deloitte Touche economist view. There's so many economist perspectives that are fresh off the presses, all saying the same thing. You're going to have higher mortgage rates, but 370, 4%, it's not enough to hit purchases at all, but it definitely will hit refis. That's just the way it works out. And keep in mind, why does 4% work just fine without impact? Because we have excess demand for housing. And while marginally some potential buyers may get priced out, you still have so much demand for people who will remain qualified. It doesn't change the numerator denominator equation, right? So let me show you a picture. I'm almost done here, guys. This is the MBA forecast in a picture. Help me with, just do two things. Look at the gray line. 3.8 trillion is last year's number. Biggest year in mortgage origination history in the United States, matched only by 2003, which was basically a dead heat even total of mortgage origination volume. Hugely driven by refis. Look at the yellow line beneath it, $2.4 trillion in refis. You know, we're going to have what we call coupon burnout. When rates move into the threes, very little refinanceable product left except for cash out refinancing, which is still a marginal percentage of the total number. So forecasted for 2021 for 2.4 trillion to drop to 1.6 trillion in refis. You know, that's $700 billion decline. And then for next year, dropping down to 600 billion. So another $1 trillion decline just in refis. So you see from last year's 3.8 through next year's 2.3, a $1.5 trillion decline. I mean, that's more than total loan origination volume, in 2014. So roughly. So, this is going to be a change. It's going to impact the business, but it's going to impact people differently. Okay, so let me close with the last couple slides. I've been in this thing for decades. I started as a loan rep. I originated loans, ended up doing really well and got promoted and ran branches and regions and divisions, and then ended up running organizations and finally companies, and went to Freddie Mac and ran a big real estate company. And then Obama recruited me to come into FHA and then the MBA. That's just my pathway. We all have our paths that we're going on, but one thing we all need to remember about our business, it's all about change and how we manage it. So I want to go through what I think is going to happen next in our companies and our teams that we work with, and look at the left side. Rate competition is now going to be important. Where last year it didn't matter because we were making big margins, and frankly, many of us were pricing out of the market to slow volume. It was all about operations and processing staff. This time there is going to be rate competition, and some LOs, particularly those that were more refi dependent and didn't maintain really strong relationships in their purchase market, they're going to blame their companies. That's what the standard, not all of them, but that's what standard loan rep behavior is. They're going to identify product gaps. Man, so-and-so's got this, so-and-so's got that. I need that first-time home buyer program. Where's that jumbo program? I need a one-time close construction perm that's better, boom, boom, boom. And that's going to be, these are going to be the things that they look at. Margin compression is going to occur. If you run a branch or an operation that saw those rich margins, competition is going to bring those margins back to more normalized levels that we see in a typical year. Last year is just an anomaly brought on by a recession, the Fed intervening, driving rates super low, making a boom for our industry that just won't be repeated for a long, long time. Some tougher deals are going to happen. We're going to have LOs that, didn't keep the relationships intact. They're going out trying to bring new relationships into their organization, and they're going to bring some tougher deals in. It's going to make it harder for your underwriting teams and your processing teams, and they're going to have to get ready for that. Recruiting, I don't need to tell you this. All of you, I assume, are being recruited. The hiring offers, the hiring incentives are just absurd. I'm a believer that the grass isn't greener on the other side, but we'll figure this out as this all washes out. But nevertheless, it's going to hurt. One of my clients lost one of his top producers, a wonderful woman who said she's only going because of the hiring bonus. She's already disgruntled, so she says. But this is just what happens. People who will offer huge BIP packages. That the trade-off for a high BIP package is a rate challenge. So all that's going to go on. But this has happened over and over in our industry over the decades that I've been around. The good news is that bottom line on the left, refi shops are going to hurt the most. The centralized call center platforms that made their business on refinancing and ran at 70, 80, 90% refis last year, they're not going to be prepared for this. Even some large banks, not all, but some large banks, as I look at their year-end totals and refi to purchase mix, one in particular is at 98%. They virtually did no purchase business because they were just refining their balance sheet. They didn't have the relationships. So to the right, you think about, so what do I have to do? If I'm a manager, I'm a leader, or I'm an originator myself, I got to realize that I'm moving back into a proactive selling environment. It's not just simply quoting a rate and then worrying about my processing and operations team getting a deal done in time. I've got to go out and actually convince realtors to bring me loans again. And I may not have done that as aggressively as I needed to over the past year. You also need to realize it's somewhat of a B2B sale rather than a B2C sale. Refi is B2C. You're dealing directly with the borrower. Purchase is more B2B. You're having to pull through. It's a pull through sale. We're having to pull the buyer through that referral partner. And that requires the next point, which is selling skills. It requires your ability to build relationships and be able to use your sales skills to have them think that you're probably the best choice for my next buyer. And that's a real challenging thing because it involves rejection, right? And that's something that we all learned early on in our careers as LOs, depending on when you joined. I grew up in a world where we made day-to-day broker calls because we didn't have cell phones or internet. And so you actually had to go literally knock on realtor doors all day long, and constant rejection was part of your life. But it creates call reluctance. A lot of LOs aren't ready for this. I've been asked to coach many LOs from some of my clients who have just asked me if they wouldn't mind if I joined, if I talked with them, and excuse those pop downs. And they're saying, look, I don't want to beat the streets again. These are top producers, who totally killed it the last several years because we've had all quantitative easing through the recovery from the Great Recession, and then all this quantitative easing from the pandemic. And so, refis have been a big part of our life for the last decade. Well, it's going to change. And many have telling me, Dave, honestly, I didn't pay attention to my client base as much as I should have. I got to start over again. I'm not sure I have the energy to do it. And, we've talked about ways to do that. I know many of you have coaches that you work with that are top producers right now and can do that. But it does come down to differentiation. How are you different? What do you do to make yourself unique in a marketplace? And I think that's going to be interesting as we move forward. Last thing I would just say, while all this is going on, since this is the Mortgage Bankers Association of Washington, you've got to keep your eyes open. I mean, what Mark Calabria, the director of the FHFA, slipped into the preferred stock purchase agreement in January has impacted all of you. He limited cash sales to no more than $1.5 billion to the GSEs in any 12-month period. That's really hard for many independent mortgage bankers who depend on the cash window, many community banks that only use the cash window. It depends on how much volume you do and how much you needed that, but that may force some to do either more correspondent lending with the big banks again and the other non-bank that are big and correspondent, or you may have to get more sophisticated in securitization and hedging. And so all of this is sort of interesting dynamic. He slipped in the limitation on second homes and investor properties to no more than 7% in any rolling 52-week period. No investor can manage to that. That's why you saw like 200 basis point haircuts on investors in second homes immediately. And that really not only impacted future volume, it impacted your pipelines. And there's more. I'm not going to explain what else was in the PSPA, but he can do more to the PSPAs. And that's why being active and participating in the marketplace is key. So, I think you got a great story to tell realtors. Honestly, I think that's the opportunity is you take a handful of slides like this, the one that shows the demographics, the one that shows the home price appreciation, one of the forecasts, or maybe two that shows constantly increasing sales volume. You package that together, and that's a story for any potential buyer that says, man, I should buy a home. And even if I have to pay a little more, I got 17% locked in for the next 2 years. Not locked in, but I have upside potential over the long run. And rates are, potentially going to rise, and I want to take advantage of that now. For realtors who want to feel confident about the market they're in, demographics are the driver of our business. In 2008, when the Great Recession hit, we were losing owner-occupied households in terms of overall housing starts in America. We were losing them on an annual basis. We were losing owner-occupied households through 2014 when it started to shift. We were only growing rental housing. Over the last 3 years, we've grown owner-occupied, owned single-family housing by 1 million to 1.5 million units per year. It's all demographics. That millennial generation that wasn't of age in the 20s is now of age in the 30s, and they're coming at the market in droves. And for the next 7 years or 8 years, as you saw, it only becomes more demand. So a really interesting story. You got to be prepared for the refi contraction. It's going to be real. The numbers are big, and lender behavior, the recruiting, loan officer skills, retraining yourself, retraining your people. That's the name of the game as we move forward. I hope some of that stuff resonates, but there you go. So I'm open to talk about anything. There's a lot more going on in Washington we could talk about. Talk about the market. We could talk about the weather, which vaccine you got. It's all good.
We've got blue skies in Seattle today.
Ooh.
Yeah, and we're making
The ma-
progress on
so
our
it's-
vaccine.
So the mountain's out, as we say. The
And the
mountain is
mountain's
out.
out. Yes, you know it. You
Yeah.
know it. Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dave. We so appreciate your brilliance and the delivery and your time. And I have asked participants to do kind of a one-on-one question with you. And I have a couple of volunteers. Sarah Monzo is one of them. And
Good. Don't be
Sarah's
shy.
really. Sarah's with Caliber. And
Ah, good.
Sarah, if you want to open your microphone and your video, will you join us?
I'm on. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sarah.
Beautiful.
Okay. You kind of answered a lot. I mean, the first thing that came to everybody's mind was what do you see the rates doing with inflation over the next few months, right? Not the entire year, but the next few months. And then we kind of have a follow-up question on that about the housing crisis. And do we see it getting any better for low to moderate income households? What needs to happen? And we have a big project happening in Tacoma. I relocated to Tacoma, and we have this new project. It's called Home in Tacoma, and they are really hitting at it hard, which we think is a good thing for attainable housing. It creates more mid-scale multifamily, duplex, triplex, fourplex, removes single family exclusionary zoning, allows for ADUs, DADUs in an effort to create more in-city, infill attainable housing. But we have a lot of people that are just really going against it. Not in my backyard, they don't want it, especially in our two more affluent regions of the city. Where do we see that going? This housing crisis is insane. Yes, it's great that we've seen starts, but lumber is at an all-time high.
Right.
I think they said $36,000 on average is the additional cost just from the lumber issue per bill. $100 on average per month for renters. I mean, what do we see the federal government doing?
So yes, no, that's not a yes or no answer. It's a great question, Sarah. So first on rates, I think anybody who predicts rates is crazy. I mean, Barry Habib's a good friend of mine. I don't know if any of you guys follow Barry, but remember the infamous, notice to float and then rates move the opposite direction. He was all embarrassed about it. And I of course took every opportunity to send him about 10 emails, but yesterday was a great example. We get a 4.9 inflation number, markets go crazy. An oil pipeline, thankfully that's going to resolve itself quickly. But any number of things can drive rates pretty dramatically. And I would encourage you, we got to be careful to watch what the Fed says, and how they say it is going to be even more important. But so I would say, the best rate is today. And I don't gamble on rate markets. It's just the nature of the beast. I think the trend is up. And, on LinkedIn, I recently took a picture of the 10-year going back, I don't know, quite a ways, 3 years. And I just drew one sort of trend line. Yeah, we're bumping around, but the trend is definitely up. And so every forecaster is saying that's going to continue. That's sort of a subject for how gutsy do you feel, and how gutsy does your borrower feel? Too bad we don't have a good old option arm we can sell them. Just kidding. So the other point on inventory. So a couple of things to think about. Let's talk about resale inventory and when it's going to come to market. By the way, Tacoma has a lot of government employees, right? So that's always been a big government market for obvious reasons, and so having an affordable housing initiative there is far more critical than many other parts of the state. But the thing that I would emphasize as we think about housing is twofold. One is, so I talked to Mark Zandi, this economist from Moody's, at length about the housing market and inventory. And one of the dynamics we're seeing is we're not seeing as much of a spring market bounce as we expected. Because with all the appreciation, you'd think that you actually would expect a higher lift on listing inventory so people can lock in the gains. Because the old rule in places like California is no matter how big the appreciation number, it's not real until you lock it in. So one thing people are thinking is, we're still in COVID. States are just opening. A lot of sellers, may feel uncomfortable with people coming and walking in their homes, going out and looking at houses. So the question is, will we have a springish market in the fall, or will we have more of a steady listing inventory gains as the nation reopens? And that's yet to be seen, but Mark thinks that we will. And so that'll help augment listing inventory as we move forward, as the nation opens up. But there's more. So the administration, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, the Biden team, forget where you stand politically, let's just talk how it affects our business. The Biden team had in their proposal for the infrastructure package, 100,000 new housing units to be built across the country. There's a first-time home buyer subsidy package. You remember he ran on a $15,000 home buyer tax credit idea. That bill has already been introduced in the Ways and Means Committee. There's another bill that Maxine Waters hasn't marked it up. She has it as a discussion draft, which is a down payment assistance bill, which wouldn't be a tax credit. It would actually be a DPA bill, similar dollars for first-time home buyers. I know we're all saying we don't need more buyers, we need more inventory, but there's a lot of focus on the affordable end of the market. The other thing the Biden team has spoken openly about is working on zoning restrictions. I know Marcia Fudge, the HUD secretary, is working with state governors and, more importantly, mayors to talk about zoning restrictions. The lumber problem, Sarah, as we all know, Canada totally shut down, and a lot of our lumber comes from Canada. I assume a lot comes from Washington, but a lot comes from Canada. That nation shut down much more aggressively, in fact, than the United States did. So we just weren't cutting wood. And then we had the tariff war, and tariffs were placed on imports from Canada. Both of those will naturally relieve themselves over time. This year is still just going to be a tough one. It's going to be, time to solve. The builders are building faster. I showed you that slide. They're building at a pace not seen since 2003, roughly. And that's only going to go up. But it's going to take a time for this high demand to be met with a right amount of inventory. So you guys are going to be dealing, I think, with the kind of current market conditions you're dealing with here for quite a while. Not the best answer, but it's the reality, I think.
It's hard to accept, isn't it, Sarah? With the first-time home buyers really fuel the housing industry, and we haven't had a first-time home buyer market. I can't remember how long it's been.
Yeah.
Well, and it might be interesting to talk about that first-time home buyer credit, because there's a lot of controversy about that in our industry of how
Yes.
good is it actually going to be for us or for people.
Well, Sarah, let me just say, not to get into the politics of it, but because I worked in the Obama administration, a lot of the guys in the new team are folks I worked with, and so I'm in sort of regular conversations. I'm on the team. Maxine Waters put together a team to help work on this bill. It's a work group. We don't have a say really, where we provide input on regular meetings. I will tell you, in the end of the day, I don't think it makes it into legislation. And it doesn't make it into legislation, I think, for two reasons. One of which is you can get down payment assistance, all you guys can. Right now through HFAs or Chenoa or whatever you guys work with, you can get DPA. And Washington in particular has a very healthy housing finance agency. And they hate Chenoa, by the way, but nevertheless, you can.
Good job. Lisa DeBrock is on the call.
You can get DPA that they get, and they can provide through a process that is under a little bit of attack from one center in the banking committee, and we're going to have to fight that out. Stockton Williams heads NCHSA in Washington. Stockton and I worked together in the Obama administration and at HUD. He's a good friend. And so is it really needed at a level? Is that the real important investment for the infrastructure package? This package starts at 1.9 trillion roughly. I can assure you that even after the discussions yesterday in the White House with the leadership in the minority from the House and the Senate, they're going to have to whittle that number down. And Joe Manchin's going to have a big role in this. So in the end of the day, when they get to the cutting room floor and they're deciding what not to include, and right now DPA is not in the infrastructure package as it's currently written. I think if they were to work on anything, they'd focus more on housing supply rather than housing demand. And I know that's where you guys are. But, I work with NAREP. I'm I won the Founders Award. I focused on Latino lending for decades, going back with Freddie Mac and Gary Acosta, and I formed our first joint venture way back when, and I can't remember how long ago that was. It's really important to find a way to help more minorities get into home ownership. And down payment is a huge barrier to home ownership. FICO is a barrier to home ownership, the way the scores are functioning. I'm right now working with an African-American couple. They're in their 40s, they have 3 kids, they paid their bills on time forever. He, the father, never has had credit, doesn't trust banks. Parents didn't trust banks. Grew up in a traditional African-American community where, trust of banks and vaccines and everything else didn't exist. And so he has no FICO. He has the down payment, he's got the income, he's got no FICO, and or it's 3 something because he never had credit. Should he be denied a home? He's rented his home for 5 years, never missed a payment. He's paid his cell phone, his utility bills, you know the drill. But we have a paradigm shift we got to think about with first-time home buyers, and is really critically important. But I'm not sure it's going to make it into this legislation just because of the negotiation challenges and the fact that we have an overheated market. And frankly, there's a lot of policymakers, and I'm sure Brooke Smith from the MBA and the team there saying on the Hill, you can get DPA already. It's, you can go get it right now through state housing finance agencies. Many municipalities have housing finance agencies. In fact, there's over 1,000 agencies in America that offer some support for housing, and many offer down payment assistance. So anyway, that's the long answer that nobody cared about, but I'm giving it to you anyway.
I don't know if Lisa DeBrock, who's with Washington State Housing Finance Commission, wants to comment on that, but Lisa, let me know if you do. Moving on, Ryan Fraley, who's with the Idaho Mortgage Lenders Association, the president of Idaho MBA, is going to join us for a question and answer briefing. Ryan, are you ready?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Lisa, and it's really good to see you, Dave. Been back at NA, we've met briefly, but back at NAC a couple times some years ago, and that's kind of awesome. Where my question stems is I'm coming hot off a few meetings yesterday for NAC with our Idaho senators and representatives, and it was a little weird doing it virtually this year, but MBA pulled it off. And, one of the questions that it seems to be kind of an unknown for me right now is we've got all this stimulus. It's a lot of money. It's expensive, a lot of question around how is it paid for. And so there's all kinds of proposals that raise multiple taxes, whether that's capital gains, removal of 1031, corporate taxes. And so all of it seems to be on the table. Obviously, you can't have all of it go up. It's too detrimental. But do you have any insight on where you think there is going to be some upward movement, if any at all?
I'm assuming you met with Crapo yesterday? We
did, yes. Yep.
Yeah. Good guy, by the way. We had dinner together. My wife was there too. And I think you all know I have prostate cancer. He had prostate cancer too. So we were swapping stories that none of you want to hear about. But look, I'm sure he gave an earful about the amount of spending. I have my own view of the cost of the last tax package that was passed during the Trump administration. It's very aggressive. I think the Biden proposal doesn't bring us back to previous regimes, whether it be Obama or Bush or previously for corporate taxes. But the question is what can be on the table. And we've all heard feedback from McConnell on tax policy, and really we've also heard feedback from Joe Manchin. And that margin of victory is one vote, is no votes. You can't lose anybody if you're going to go straight party line, assuming no Republican supports a package. I don't think any Republican is going to support any form of tax modification. It just would defy the the Trump administration's tax package that was put through, and given everything that's gone on yesterday, I just don't think that's going to make it. Let me just suggest to you guys this. We have, I worked in the Obama administration. Obama got all his legislation done in 2 years. First 2 years of the first term, in 2010, the Tea Party got elected and came in and took over the House and became the majority, and that was it. After that, no big legislation went through. But prior to that, he was able to get the Affordable Care Act and Dodd-Frank through. So far, this regime, we've gotten through a very strong bipartisan bill, the COVID bill, the relief bill that just recently passed. But he's really, the president, I think is, I don't think, I know, he's heavily focused on this infrastructure package, which will be hugely stimulative. And then the question is, can you get pay-fors built into that package? So either it all gets negotiated down to a much smaller infrastructure number. And I know Crapo's going to vote for some infrastructure package. Maybe he'll vote no. I haven't spoken to him lately, but a lot of that's going to be what McConnell's permitting as well. But nevertheless, or the leadership. But we'll either end up down with a much smaller infrastructure that doesn't have pay-fors, a larger infrastructure that has some pay-fors that they agree to, some modification of the corporate tax rate, but not completely going to the level that Biden wants. This is sausage making right now. We have a very divided Congress. And frankly, what happened in the House yesterday is really disruptive to just the political environment in general. And I don't do my business in DC full time anymore. I can only imagine if Kilmer can even figure out how this plays out. We're going to have to watch to see if there's any bipartisanship. If it's going to happen, it'll happen in the Senate. But we have to see if there's any bipartisanship coming our way, and that'll determine how all of this comes out. It's a lot of spending. It's hugely stimulative. I will tell you this just in closing, Ryan, that I talked to Julia Coronado. You can look her up. She's heads macro policy advisors, brilliant economist, always at panels with the Federal Reserve and stuff like this. She told me yesterday, she says, if the infrastructure package goes through, GDP is going to keep rising and the deficit will go down because of the infrastructure package. I know that math seems crazy to many people, but that's how Clinton got us out of the last deficit. He didn't, but the trend of the economy was so strong that the deficit went to zero, as you all recall. But back then, in terms of on an annualized budget basis, it actually began declining. So just interesting times we're in. And the question is, will there be bipartisanship? And Crapo is obviously a key player because not only was he chair of the banking committee for the last 4 years, he's really a reasonable guy. He's a great example of like a good, solid, straight down the middle Republican. And the question is, can you get the Crapos of the world to come to the table? More importantly, can you get folks like our senator from Alaska or Maine, or those that are, on the moderate side, to come into a bipartisan bill? And there's a lot more to that discussion. A lot has to do with when's their next election? Are they getting pressure? They have pressure to lose. Does McConnell have to let a couple of them come in and vote yes in order to maintain a seat? All this stuff comes into play as we look at the dynamics here.
Good stuff. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. It's going to continue to be a wild ride. So
yeah.
Thank you, Ryan. We have one more, Ryan, that has a question for you. And before Ryan Hills is going to join us and talk about margins. But before I go to that stage, I just want to remind everybody, register for the auction. Mindy's putting the auction information in the chat. Please join us. We're raising money for Habitat for Humanity. Ryan Hills, thank you.
Good to see you, David, man. That was amazing. Thank you so much. Like, that was quick to the point, like so much value in that. And I'd love to have you on the show soon. I know you said yes in the past. We've missed text messages, so we'll put that together. But Housing Wire had a famous article back in like 2018 talking about, margins compressed and lenders were losing like $200 per loan. Do you see us going back to that in the future? Is it going to get that bad, or is it maybe better than that? What are your thoughts on that?
When did you start in the business? What year, Brian?
Early 2004.
Okay. You know, it's funny, a lot of that's good. You have, at least you had the experience going through the Nina Sissa cycle as well, and then the blow up. It's funny, a lot of branch managers and top producers I've met came in at like 08, 09, 07. I think we're going to see really insane behavior. Some big IMBs have just gone public, whether it's UWM or Quicken. I won't say Caliber because I have friends from Caliber on the phone. Actually, they didn't go public, but Sanjeev is a very good friend. But but you know, in the end of the day, you just have to look at the volume, and we're going to be oversupplied in lenders and loan officers and undersupplied in borrowers. That's just because of refis. The data, I just go by the data. And when I've been through these cycles before, I used to talk about the streets are going to be flooded with loan officers returning their Mercedes and BMWs because they can no longer make the lease payment. You know, it's a zero-sum game. Everybody, I ask people, how are you going to make it? We're going to do more business. We're going to acquire more people. Well, everybody's telling me that. I talk to every lender in the country. I just had a conversation with the CEO of Guild, who bought a big company in the Northeast. And she was telling me about, you know, now Fairway is going to come recruit them. Well, I was at the same time getting emails from Fairway asking me, what about Guild's purchase of this company? I mean, you know, this is a zero-sum game as a business we operate in. And I think that the originators that were more successful in purchase over the last year, that were 65% or above in purchase, that's just a threshold I'm using, for last year, have the better chance to survive. But are your margins going to compress? You're going to see stupid pricing and credit risk taking from those companies that have to prove to shareholders or Wall Street investors, or just need to stay alive to support these processors and everybody they hired this last year to manage that massive slug of volume you guys had to deal with, you know. And again, I've seen it, but there are winners and losers through this thing. And the folks that really go out and use, you know, are really good at selling, and selling in a way that builds relationships, but also builds that referral. You know, they'll be differentiated. But I would expect volume, you know, revenue contraction for loan officers generally across the country. That'll be, you know, fairly significant. And, you know, many during this period are going to leave. We're going to see those that struggle and can't deal with rejection and just can't deal with the purchase market, may have been, you know, done whatever, you know, production last year. I'm not going to give out numbers, but you could have made a pretty good living doing, you know, just a pretty small amount of volume in a relative sense to hot real producers last year, and thinking, you know, I'm good at this business and I'm going to retire in this thing. Those are the guys that aren't going to make it. And we all know this. I mean, we've all been around. I need someone who's been around. I started in very early 1980s. So I've just seen that washout occur too many times.
I love how you tied in the IPOs too, because that was the second question. If we had more time, is I wanted your thoughts on that, but you did it together. So thank you. That was good.
Well, look, you know, we look at Ishbia right now. I mean, it's he's really mad at me because I don't like the way he's coming at the market and banning lenders in the wholesale space. That's a whole different subject. But so he called me on a Sunday a couple of weeks ago and wanted to debate it with me. That's what Matt does. But I'm looking at that stock when it first IPO'd. I'm looking at where it is today. I'm looking at his last earnings call where he said where his earnings were down, and yet he said I can be number one lender in America. I don't know how you become number one lender in America with earnings going down unless you just buy at a loss. I mean, is your goal to have market share, or is your goal to make money? And right now, I think for shareholders, you know, he could go the Tesla route, right? Where Tesla was all about in the first few years, selling units at a loss. I just don't know what's going to, I don't know how this is going to play. And we have to just watch and see what happens. But hang in there, guys, because we all know it's a really great industry and it's a great purchase market. And we're going to see the washout of those that don't make it. And honestly, even the rate baiters, they'll fail too. You know, remember Countrywide was the #1 lender in America. And we can go back to, I don't know if anybody remembers Homeside, but that's going back a long, long time.
Lomas and
Countrywide,
Nettleton.
yeah, Lomas and Nettleton. Yeah, thank you for helping me with age, Lisa. I feel good about that. But the you know, this goes back. You don't own market share. You only rent it, and you know, even Quicken is going to do some crazy stuff. And by the way they'll do it, and it could work from an accounting standpoint, but the way you start is you overvalue servicing. And one of the interesting plays right now is, can I pay more for servicing because I'm going to have a forecast of higher interest rates? So my duration models are now long. So rather than a 4 multiple, do I go to a 5 multiple or 5.5? And then I could price it into my wholesale price. And everybody's going to say, how is he doing this? And that's the way the math is going to be worked on the back end. And he has some accounting firm that's buying it, but it's, you know, we are a business that doesn't have a lot of great foresight sometimes. So,
Well, this is a great conversation. I hate to say that we're done and to say goodbye to you. And I don't know if you have time, but Tony Blodgett has another question for you if you're interested, or if you need to go, we will say thank you and goodbye.
we can do one more. That's great.
Okay. Tony, you want to sign on?
Sure, of course. Thank you, Dave. Great talk. We're already seeing this play right now with servicing valuations, as you're mentioning, and that's an interesting strategy that people are taking, and what their forecast is for, you know, kind of this cycle of inflation and rates over the next, you know, 18, 24 months definitely is playing into that as well. Some people think there'll be another, you know, run down at some point before the long-term run up, and that's playing into that. But anyway, I digress.
Well, and that's what Habib believes we're going to have another.
Sure.
Yeah, but I don't buy into it, but we'll see.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, some of the capital markets teams listen to him. So,
yeah.
All right. So my question, and I've heard you talk about this, and hopefully quick answer, but you had talked about the Supreme Court is ruling on the structure of the FHFA and what that might be. And you just kind of spoke on it briefly when I heard you last time. I'm just curious if you could expand a little bit on what's the likelihood that would go, and was there precedent set by the ruling on the CFPB? And if it did change the structure of the leadership of the FHA, what's the implications of that? How likely would we see Calabria, you know, out of that seat? And would it possibly change some of the pressures that we're seeing right now with you know, this agreement, and you know, the second homes and G fees and the 0.5 point refinance fee and all of those things? If you could just button that up in like 30 seconds, that would be great.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. No. Okay, real quick. So we're talking about Collins versus Mnuchin, which is a Supreme Court case that was heard in November of last year. Has two aspects to it. One is statutory, and the statutory piece is whether the net worth sweep was legal. The second is constitutional. The constitutional challenge is to what you're referring to, Tony, is to whether it's constitutionally legitimate to have a single directorship who cannot be terminated except for cause. That's really what that comes down to. That same case, Sealy versus Cordray, no, I think it was Sealy versus whoever it was a similar suit that challenged the CFPB structure. Now, there is a slight difference in the two cases. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but just remember, the CFPB could not only issue CIDs, they can also do the enforcement, and they can override the court. So they had more expansive authority than the FHFA director has, and so that's only the one unique variable. Other than that, it's identical. We expect, don't listen to the shareholder websites. We expect from inside the Beltway attorneys that they're going to rule in favor, consistent with the CFPB ruling, that a single directorship is not constitutional unless it can be terminated at will. And at which point, oh, by the way, we expect that ruling. Right now, the expectation is June. So before the July 4th break. So right now, that's sort of where we're all looking at the ruling. Hard to tell exactly when the Supreme Court will rule, but expect June. If they rule in that case, Calabria's out, right? It's going to tick off the banking committee big time because Calabria is a chosen son of the banking committee, but he'll be gone. I'm confident that the Biden team is already looking at candidates to replace Mark. When that happens, the 50 basis point refi fee goes away. I think the new capital rule that's being put into place gets stopped and re-looked at. It's a final rule, but just like CFPB did with the QM rule, I think it's a final rule that is going to be stopped for review. All of this stuff about the cash window and non-owners and investors, second homes, and investors, I think all of that stops. Doesn't mean they're going to totally loosen. I think they're just going to pull this all back. Mark is trying to contract the GSEs into the tiniest little ball possible and then throw them out to a market that makes them far less worthwhile to us. That's literally what he's doing. It's in his playbook. I wrote an article for Housing Wire on the subject. I laid out his testimony from 2012 where he specifically laid out everything he's doing right now. But the last thing he just did, Tony, and all you guys should be aware of, I don't know if they talked about it at NAC this week, is the living will requirement that Mark put out that they have to put in place. This living will is a huge deal. The living will says they have to put in a plan for going into receivership and how they're going to capitalize the surviving entities. That's an entirely different conversation. All previously was release, right? Recap and release. This is a living will to put them in receivership. And that's receivership is a pathway that Mark has sole authority to do under HERA. It doesn't require the Treasury Secretary to cooperate. He can single-handedly put them in receivership, in which case they're done. Then they become limited life receivership entities, LLREs, and they have 5 years total, three-year initial period and 2-year extension to reform. But Mark has told them they have to come up with a plan to do that, to reform and raise the capital to get there without leaning on the $240 billion that sits in the preferred stock purchase agreement. This is stuff that none of you guys probably pay attention to, but all that means is they're going to have to raise pricing in a big way on top of the capital rule to meet the standard of the living will, which he said he's in the rule, he's given them 2 years to implement. But he gave a speech at Brookings a few days ago, which we've all seen, all of us in housing policy who care, where he said he thinks he can implement it in 6 months. So this man is a crazy man on a mission. I've known Mark forever. I'm very blatant in my view about him. He's a libertarian economist who's never run a business in his life and thinks the GSEs ought to be cut off at the knees. And he's doing everything possible to make that happen. But right now, the way the administration looks at it is he can only do so much harm. If he tries to do the receivership move, then the administration will try to challenge him on legal points because there is a conservatorship document that he's obligated to that is owned by the Treasury. It's separate from his right to go into receivership, but that would have to be argued out in the courts. Ultimately, the DOJ would defend that against itself because it's the same lawyers or two government entities. So yeah, there you go. That's enough of the mess to give you an idea what's going on. But it's worth paying attention to. And frankly, what he snuck into the PSPA in January tells you, you just got to constantly look at what the FHSA is putting out. Even MBA didn't catch it, right? I mean, you heard about the non-owners and the investor properties from PennyMac. Probably they were the first to raise prices like 200 basis points. I don't know if they were first, but several lenders were first in line because they had read the language and they know the implementation date. And even MBA didn't put out that notice, I don't think. And then everybody quickly responded. But that's the risk we have with a guy who doesn't have the professionalism to make the first call. When I was in the NBA, I was fortunate to have Ed DeMarco, who's a Bush appointee, and then I had Mel Watt. Both those guys, they'd always call me first before anything was announced. So would Rich Cordray. He'd always say, Dave, we're coming out with new policy. I want to tell you what's in it. So the NBA wasn't blindsided, and they could help the industry prepare and think about what the response should be. This whole thing of just sticking it in, surprising the industry, that doesn't work, you know.
No.
Okay, we've gone too far. So let's do this, guys. Ryan, I'd love to support you anytime I can. And Lisa and team, you know, I'm a big fan of the Washington NBA. So anytime I can help you, let me know.
We're your biggest fans. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody,
right.
for participating. Dave, you
Take
should
care, gang.
join our auction. It's 8:30 Pacific or Eastern time if you want to join us.
Okay, I'll look at the link. All right, see you.
Bye-bye.